Welcome to Critical Issues Commentary, the radio ministry of Twin City Fellowship, a non-denominational Christian church in Minneapolis. We're on the web at www.cicministry.org. This is Todd Kramasa, your host for the next half hour. I'm filling in for the vacationing hit couple. And once again, we're speaking with Bob DeWaay, pastor of Twin City Fellowship and author of Critical Issues Commentary. Pastor Bob, this is our third in a series, Global Warming, Blind Faith, and Global Delusion. We're talking about a review you've undertaken of a book, Taken by Storm, The Troubled Science, Policy, and Politics of Global Warming, by two authors, Canadian college professors at that, Christopher Essex, Ross McKittrick. I'm going to get right to it here. Are human beings causing global warming?
Well, there we go. That's an assumption, but not something that's a fact that we can know.
Anyone's questioning it? Besides these two and a few others?
Very few.
Very few.
The ones that do are considered not worth listening to because we have blind faith that humans are the center of the universe and that whatever's going on, we must be causing it.
Anyone that questions it is pushed to the margin, and they're outside of the official science.
Yeah, skeptic. They're a skeptic.
Their ideas are nothing.
Yeah. So in this book by Essex and McKittrick, they claim that the official science that we talked about in the first one of these messages starts with the assumption that whatever average modelers of climate construct should be flat over time if all human influence were removed. In other words, the assumption is if there were no humans, climate would be exactly the same year after year after year, wouldn't get warmer, wouldn't get colder. Now, is there some reason to believe that?
Well, if you're asking me, I'd say absolutely not.
Of course there's no reason to believe that, all right? You can't prove that climate won't change if there's no humans.
Well, if you're not factoring in the bigger picture factors.
Yeah, and you got things like the sun's output energy and water vapor and so on and so forth, and ocean currents, all these things we've been talking about. But they assume in order to make their models and then create this curve that shows what supposedly happened because of humans, that if there were no humans, climate would just be flat and not change. Mm-hmm. Now, if you probably cornered these guys, they'd say, well, no, that's not really true. But they're operating as if the assumption was true. Mm-hmm. All right. So with that faulty assumption, that graphs are created that show change, and change must be caused by something humans have done. Quoting Essex and McKittrick, who refute this idea. They say this, quote, the assumption is, in effect, that unless something forces it from outside the system, any particular average you construct, like temperature or radiative forcing, ought to be flat over time. It is all very cozy for the heat theorists, all right? Mm-hmm. But if you start with not a static, but a changing and dynamic climate, which is exactly what it is, then you can't prove that humans are making it go one way or another. How do you know some other factor isn't causing it?
It could be one of countless other factors.
Of course. Climate's changed over time, and it has for centuries. The causes are complex, but the models are constructed to show the humans are the culprits.
Let's talk about that quote that we found on page 217. I'll read it for you. There is little sense that more work is needed on the models. Models are not perfect, they say, but they can't be wrong in classical doublespeak. Love that. They must conclude it is human moral turpitude, and that is the cause of the discrepancy.
Yeah, right. The sinners.
Yeah.
You know, wicked humans are doing terrible things. They're heating their homes, driving their cars, going to work.
Inhaling, exhaling.
Yeah, all these things that humans do, creating this big problem. And so now we have to have climate hung around our neck because we're the sinners making the climate some way that we wouldn't want it to be. And anything that happens, it sort of reminds me of a sarcastic or ironic quote from one of the early apologists. I think it was Tertullian, but on the other hand, it could have been Justin Martyr. It was like 15 years ago when I read this. But he was complaining about how the Romans were blaming everything that went wrong in the empire on the Christians. Mm-hmm. And there were the quote something like, the rains don't fall on the crops, and the Tiber overflows its banks, and so on and so forth. And the shout is the same, the Christians to the lion. And then he says, so many Christians to one lion?
Yeah.
So the point is, the Christians were blamed for anything that went wrong in the weather or natural consequences in the Roman Empire because the Romans believed that the gods were angry because the Christians weren't doing their duty to pay homage to the deities.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so they believed that. Given that worldview, then Christians caused the problem. Well, take that and fast forward to our day,
mm-hmm.
and now it broadens out. It isn't just Christians, it's every human on planet Earth. And so something goes wrong. There's a hurricane, there's a drought somewhere else, there's too much rain in Iowa, there's not enough rain in Illinois, and the shout is the same: we've got to quit driving our cars.
Right. There is no escaping that now. It used to be, well, temperatures are getting warmer, and that was where it stood. Anything now, weather-related, a snowstorm in April in New Hampshire because of climate change, because of CO2.
Yeah, exactly.
Amazing. You can't escape it.
Yeah, and it's just as irrational as the Romans thinking that the Christians caused it because they didn't do their homage to the Roman gods. It's just as irrational because this whole global warming is a blind faith, leap of faith religion that you have to believe because it can't really be known.
And leap they do. They throw themselves whole hog into it.
Exactly. I'm going to quote another thing from our book, Taken by Storm, quoting from page 224. We have no way of knowing, even in principle, what the 20th century climate would have looked like if no one had ever learned how to extract and use fossil fuels. Yet much of the debate between, quote, skeptics and, quote, believers in global warming seems to be based on the assumption that we would know what the climate would have looked like, in particular, that T-Rex, that temperature they talk about.
Right.
And we just have to hash out whether this or that temperature statistic is really going up or not, taken by storm. But the fact is, if you don't know what it would have been like without the humans, you can't create a chart showing what it's like because of the humans.
And no responsible researcher would go near something like this without a solid methodology and enough data to investigate one way or another.
So if you don't have a baseline, you can't know anything.
Right.
So why are we wasting all of this energy worrying about something we can't know and we don't have any control over?
Something's afoot here.
Something is very, very afoot, and we are being deceived, and massively so. Here's what our authors say: the climate can vary, jump, rearrange itself, and generally defy all expectations on any time and spatial scale. There's no requirement to explain it by an external mechanism. Mm-hmm. The internal dynamics of the climate system are more than adequate to account for just about any climate change, no matter how large or sudden. So we're worrying about something that's a remote, it's just hardly even a considerable possibility that the amount of CO2 we're putting in the air, given the infinitesimal size compared to all the other factors, it's hard to imagine. I mean, if it was causing it, we can't know it. Mm-hmm. We can't prove it. So we might as well go worrying about it.
We've been speaking a lot about uncertainty. We can't know this. We don't know that. A new term was, to me, I haven't come across this one very often, nescience and uncertainty, the difference between the two.
Okay.
Let's talk about that.
Very important. And they use it. They have that in a chapter. The term nescience means lack of knowledge. And they have a funny illustration to show what nescience is all about. And
right.
Here's their question. How many extraterrestrials live on Earth? And somebody says, well, we know that there are none. Well, no, you don't. What if there is some higher order being somewhere that could actually transform themselves into exact duplicates of humans and come down and live among us and don't give away the fact that they are what they are?
Uh-huh.
Well, I suppose some persons might believe that, but you couldn't prove they didn't do it. How could you?
That's true.
Okay.
You've got a point.
How can you prove that nobody ever did that? So you can't prove a universal negative, but that's another matter.
Right.
But of course, we don't know such beings exist. We can't discuss their number. But it isn't that we're uncertain. We don't know. You can't know. It's impossible to know. So therefore, that's what nescience is. It's not uncertainty. It's a lack of knowledge.
Not uncertainty, a lack of knowledge.
Yes.
Okay.
And so you can't quantify something about which you have no knowledge.
A nebulous thing not to be grasped.
Well, like they point out, you can be a little uncertain or very uncertain, but you can't say a little nescience or some nescience. If you have it, you have no knowledge, you have no knowledge.
Mm-hmm.